challenges that you've been thinking about?
Okay. So the other one that has come up, in the past 5 years was nitrate toxicity. So if I think about situations where we're using a lot of cover crops or annual forages, all annuals are great nitrate scavengers. And so one of the things that was happening is I was getting all of these emails or calls from producers with tests that were coming back really, really high in nitrates. And they're like, what do I do? Can I still use this? That's always the question, right? And especially with late summer planted stuff, like so something after seed corn or corn silage, and it's growing into cooling conditions, they were coming up with levels that were really, really high. Like, okay, so just to give everybody the same basis, most extension has a threshold that's about 2,100 parts per million nitrate nitrogen, as that's where they say that's toxic. Anything over that, you don't want to use or you have to dilute. And these guys were coming up with, some of them, I even had some that were 20,000. That one I kind of told the guy, yeah, I don't think you should use this. But after probably, the 20th one that I got, I said, I wonder, because I had been doing a lot of research grazing, growing calves out on late summer planted stuff. And I was like, I wonder what ours was. Because guess what? I never tested it. So I went back to our samples and had actually Beth Reynolds was my master's student at the time, and she now works for Iowa State as an extension specialist. I was trying to think what it was, program coordinator. But anyway, so she was actually the one who took on the nitrate question. But she went and analyzed those samples for us. And the surprising thing was that only one out of the 6 trials that we had done had levels of nitrate that were below that 2,100 parts per million threshold. All the rest of them were higher than that. We had as high as 8,000 parts per million. So, of course, the high learner in me said, why? And why did we not have a problem? How can this be? So, of course, what do? You go back into the literature and you learn very quickly that there are some key limitations to what we currently know, as well as some really important things to understand how to assess risk. And so if I were to say one thing about our current extension documentation on nitrates, it's that we try to make it too simple. And I think because of that, we do an injustice. Because often you'll come to the conclusion you can't use something when you might be able to, dependent on the situation. And so there's some key things that people need to know and understand. One that's really, really important is that fresh forages are much less toxic than dry forages. And that's for 2 reasons. One is that it releases the nitrates at a slower rate, which means it allows the bacteria that take nitrite to ammonia, so basically detoxifying it, to keep up with the nitrate to nitrite conversion. So that's really important, because the slower it comes in, the less likely you're going to have a buildup of the toxic compound. The other thing is that fresh forages also tend to be higher quality. The amount of energy in the diet also affects how much of those bacteria that convert nitrite to ammonia are there, because they'll grow and multiply if nitrite's available and energy is available. It's just like the cow. They both need carbon and nitrogen. Well, it's carbon and nitrogen. So we can reduce risk by having a higher energy diet, like feeding grain. There's some really great work from Oklahoma way back when, where they actually just fed cows 3 pounds of corn or 6 pounds of corn, and basically showed they could decrease methemoglobin, which is the reason why nitrates are toxic. It basically, the nitrite gets into the bloodstream and it doesn't allow the cow's blood to carry oxygen, because it becomes methemoglobin and that can't carry oxygen. So the cows suffocate. even though they can breathe oxygen, the blood isn't able to carry it to the body, if that makes sense. So in this case, providing more energy can help reduce the risk. And so higher quality forages are also lower risk because they have more roomly available energy. And then there's a couple other important things. One is that brassicas, which is a common cover crop and often in the mix of things that producers were sending me that were really, really high, they're amazing nitrate scavengers. That's why crop producers put them in, is to keep the nitrates from leaching down through the soil profile. And as a consequence, they're high in nitrates. But they're also kind of like if you were to put alfalfa and corn silage in a river, that's kind of the nutrient content of them. They're very high energy. They're very high protein because they're also high nitrates, which is nitrogen. So it'll come up as protein. But they also have high sulfur, which interferes with nitrate conversion. So they kind of have their own little risk management strategy built in. And then the other thing, as we kind of talk about, is that rate of intake matters. And so in situations where they're grazing, as long as you don't put hungry cattle out or have a situation where they're restricted and then get to start eating again, you're much lower risk, especially if you allow them to be selective, because they'll eat the tops of the plants, which tend to be less higher in nitrates than the lower parts, and they can work their way into it, building up the population of bacteria that will detoxify it for you. So I think we've concentrated on the situation with hay, and hay is the highest risk, and it's highest risk for multiple reasons. But one of the things that happens, I think a lot of times, is that we'll have like a hot bale. So that 2100 is probably a great number for hay. And the reason is because if it's an average of a lot, you can have like an area in your field that, is a little bit droughtier than other areas. And so it will be higher in nitrate, and you tend to bale those areas together. And then you have one bale that's a lot higher in nitrate than others.